Welcome back to the Select Start Podcast. I'm your host. Joining me today are three of the best fantasy footballs in the business. We got three-time Select Start League champion Nye. Big Baller Eggers in the house.
Whoa, slow it down, homie. You're already starting off with all this flagrant shade. Man, you've been doing this all day, all week.
It's week one.
Get it right.
It's
four time, bro. It's four time. He keeps on saying three times because he wants to shade me on the tie we had.
It's week one. I want all the smoke. We got Big Baller Egger, bottom right in the house. We got the most kosher of killers, kosher killer, top right. How we doing, fellas?
I'm good.
It's about as well you can do it, when you're 0-1. But
I'm sitting here pumping us up, talking about three of the best fantasy footballers, but like literally three of us are all 0-1 this week. So
Yeah.
All right. For starters, we had 10 games this weekend decided by 5 points or less. We had 2 Monday night games, so I assume there are a lot of owners on pins and needles last night. I know I was. Ryan Tannehill unexpectedly throwing the ball 40 times, looking like he's playing in the air raid offense. Like,
that's that boom, Ryan Tannehill. Let's go.
I had Ryan Tannehill going against Kevin Byard. What were you guys' biggest takeaways of week one? Very briefly, I'll start with you, Kosher.
For me, there are a lot of teams that would have benefited from a much longer preseason. The shortened preseason doesn't do as many favors.
If anyone needed preseason, it was probably the referees too. Nye, what were some of your biggest takeaways of
you know what?
one?
I was going to speak on it, but Kosher beat me to the punch. It just felt like, week one of preseason this week, there were a lot of teams who just felt like they weren't in sync. You could tell some of these, trustworthy fantasy players struggled this week to kind of get into, game flow and put up the kind of numbers we're used to them putting up. I don't think, this week one has been kind of like any other week one. It felt really wonky. Hopefully, week two is a lot better. But, unless you had, guys playing in that Vikings-Packers game, you probably lost.
Big Baller Edgar, takeaways, man.
Man, quick side note. Speaking on that Packers-Vikings game, did anyone see the hit that Kevin King laid out on BC Johnson? Like, the Packers defense, those two corners were having themselves an afternoon. It was fantastic watching the games. I was in and out throughout the weekend just catching glimpses. And the biggest takeaway I got is that there are 4 teams this year that I'm absolutely targeting with quarterbacks and receivers. Because the Falcons, the Vikings, Falcons, Vikings, the Lions. Oh, my God. You can throw on these teams, guys. You can rack up yards. I know we're hella excited about Matt Ryan and his opportunities, but the Falcons let Russell Wilson just carve them to bit. Aaron Rodgers is on a revenge tour, but the Vikings is just a defense that can be taken advantage of. Mitch Trubisky, much maligned, was one of the top 12 quarterbacks this week, and who did he play? The Lions, and they didn't even have rookie cornerbacks starting for them week one. I think it's exciting that we can start to see some of these matchups falling into place that we might want to target this year.
But no, I agree. I had mentioned that to somebody earlier, like the Vikings. Like, if you're not trying to target the Vikings in fantasy passing wise, then I don't know what you were. Even the Packers, I would target the Packers as well. They really don't look like they've gotten it together on defense. But you know what? Like I said, Kirk Cousins is the king of garbage time fantasy football stats. There's not much I could fault the Packers for on that front. They were kind of comfortably ahead. I don't know so much about Detroit. Do like their secondary. If DeAndre Swift catches that touchdown pass, we're not even talking about Mitch. We're not talking about their defense. They had a chance to win that ball game. But yeah, there are some teams out there that you can definitely target. I'm targeting Phillip Rivers on the defensive side. From here on out, anybody who's playing Phillip Rivers, I'm trying to get a piece of that defense in some way, shape, or form.
All right, let's get into some top performers. We had guys like Devontae Adams. He had a monster game, 14 receptions for 156 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Obviously, he's a top-tier talent. He's well on his way to being the top wide receiver in fantasy football. He got to play the Vikings. It was absurd the way they covered him. If you have Devontae Adams, he's matchup-proof, plays with a great quarterback. He's going to play in a system that features him a lot, and I'm wondering why I just didn't take him over Michael Thomas. I'm starting to regret a lot now.
Ain't that the truth? You also had guys like Josh Jacobs. He went 25 for 93 with 3 rushing touchdowns. He's definitely looking more and more like the first-round draft pick most mocks had him listed in this year. You got quarterback performances from guys like Aaron Rodgers, who threw 4 touchdowns. Also have guys we talked about like Calvin Ridley. He went 9 for 130 with 2 touchdowns. Adam Thielen had a couple touchdowns. Who are some of you guys' top performers? And I'll start with you, Big Baller.
I'm going to start with out of left field guy. He was probably on some waiver wires if your league isn't too deep, but watching Anthony Miller absolutely give everyone a heart attack through 3 quarters and then finish with one of the top 12 wide receiver weeks with 4 receptions and a touchdown. Also some really nice catches there in the 4th quarter. We saw news earlier today broke about Allen Robinson apparently deleting all references to the Bears from any social media. He's complaining about his contract situation. Anthony Miller in his 2nd year. They let Taylor Gabriel go last year. Is there the potential that he steps up now, that they need Anthony Miller to perform with the situation that they have in their receiving core developing? I really love Anthony Miller's matchup this week. Does anyone know who the Bears are playing this week after last week's Lions matchup? Like, the Lions was a good matchup. Noah Kuda, obviously he was able to take advantage of that. Do you guys know who the Bears are playing week 2?
They have the Giants.
Exactly. So they have the Giants. Obviously, a lot was we have to wait for Monday to see how that Giants defense would perform. I like Anthony Miller in this matchup. I don't like it as much as last week's matchup against the Lions. That was prime. Something had to happen. Anthony Miller always goes off against the Lions. 2 really good games last year. 1 really good game the season before that. But Anthony Miller, I think, is a potential guy to keep an eye on, either off waiver wires or maybe he's a trade target whose owner might be a little lower on him because he's on the Bears and Trubisky is starting. But if he can be a touchdown option who can get you up in those 70 yards, he could be a stream for your team. Matchup based, of course, but I think he's an interesting guy to look at.
Nye, why don't you go ahead and tell us some of your top performers this week?
Reference a guy who was a pain in my butt Monday night. And it was Corey Davis. Here's a guy, we I don't know, I didn't rag on him, but I was a Corey Davis believer. But this is a guy who probably went undrafted in a lot of leagues. I'm just really happy to report Corey Davis is alive and kicking with a great performance Monday night in a win over the Broncos. Another guy I want to mention is Robbie Anderson. Look at the offense and the way they kind of want to play. You could definitely see Robbie Anderson as a 8-9 target type guy.
But I was looking at Robbie Anderson all week because he was on some waivers. And all week I said to myself, I love this matchup against Vegas. I forgot to mention Vegas as one of those teams I kind of want to target for passing attacks. But I was thinking to myself, if Robbie Anderson is smashing any week this year, it's going to be this week against the Raiders. It's a good matchup. Somebody talk me into why Robbie Anderson is going to keep doing this, not just this week. Robbie Anderson has flashed. This guy can do it, but I'm not fully convinced. Can somebody convince me?
Sure. Big target for Teddy Bridgewater. Bridgewater is learning the offense. He's going to need to throw, or he's going to need a safety valve or a different type of threat than Run CMC gives him a big target potentially underneath, but also gives him a target a guy that can burn.
I don't think DJ Moore and Teddy Bridgewater is a great fit as far as just the kind of quarterback Teddy Bridgewater is, and the kind of player DJ Moore is, who's more of a yard after catch type guy. With Teddy Bridgewater, the bigger targets are more of a comfort area with him. Honestly, I don't see DJ Moore being the number 1 guy. I think a lot of that is going to go to Robbie Anderson this year. Matt Rule likes big, long guys, and they paid him, follow the money.
This is week 1. I'm trying my best to stay calm about all these guys, but Darius Slayton was one of those guys who got me really excited because I waited all offseason to find out who the Giants guy was going to be, just to find out that it was the guy that I didn't roster anywhere after being on his bandwagon all summer. Darius Slayton was performing like this towards the end of last season. I think it's actually kind of interesting. He's got all his touchdowns kind of grouped together in like a 5-game span, given his 17-game career to this point. But that also is like a piece of Darius Slayton. This guy has big weeks. He had a big week this week. I think he's we kind of just talked about Robbie Anderson being the number 1 in Carolina. I think that Darius Slayton is the number 1 in New York. And if they're throwing the ball around like that, if Danny Dimes is is doing his little magic with a couple fumbles in the first half and a couple comeback passes in the second half. I really like Darius Slayton's outlook this year. Week 1 was exciting.
They might find their superstar. I mean, this guy has superstar written on him. Like, that's the way I looked at it last night. Like, he's their number one guy. We saw them gain the chemistry with Daniel Jones last year, and he looked like the guy last night.
2 other guys that definitely look like that guy, that have been that guy. 2 QBs, got Lamar Jackson throwing 3 touchdowns. Russell Wilson put on an absolute clinic with 4 touchdowns. All right, let's get into our top disappointments. Who out of these guys are we over or are we underreacting to their performances so far? We'll start with Michael Thomas. He does have the high ankle sprain. We'll talk about that later in our injury breakdown. 3 for 7 off 5 targets. When he eventually comes back from injury, are we overreacting to that performance or are we underreacting? Big baller.
First thing I have to mention is that the Saints had 14 points that you can almost give to the defense. Like, you can almost chalk those up to the turnovers that Tampa Bay had. It was a little bit of an awkward game. We'll talk from the Saints' perspective. This is not how most Saints games go down. Anyone who's a Michael Thomas owner knows you usually expect more than 3 targets. The Saints got ahead early. The Saints beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers pretty handily. I don't expect that to even happen in their next matchup. I'm more concerned about the fact that he's injured than his performance. But a high ankle sprain is worrisome. So I'm concerned. I'm definitely concerned.
Honestly, I'm not overreacting. I mean, yeah, he's going to be hurt. But the performance, I don't think it's any kind of indication of to where his season would go if he were to be playing next weekend. If you're a Michael Thomas owner out there, you're going to have to rough it for at least 1 game.
Kosher, you overreacting or underreacting?
I'm underreacting. I figure that part of the low performance was the Saints just looking out of sync, and that could be also chalked up to the shortened preseason. That was a game featuring 2 of the top passers in football, in Breeze and Brady, and neither of them looked comfortable with their team. I assume that as the season goes on, that timing gets a little bit better, and I'm assuming that Thomas comes back from that high ankle sprain and is able to be pretty much the Michael Thomas that we've come to know and expect.
So we're not overreacting on Michael Thomas. How about Carson Wentz? He went 24 for 42 for 270. He did throw 2 touchdowns, but he threw a couple interceptions to follow those and looked generally not good at all. Nye, are we overreacting or are we underreacting on Carson Wentz's performance this weekend?
I think if you're overreacting, you have the right to. He looks shaky. It looks like he has a lot of pressure on himself. It looks like I don't say he's crumbling under the pressure, but he's not meeting the expectations that everybody is setting for him. That Washington front is tough. We talked about it already. If he's, your starting quarterback, I advise to go look for a guy on this waiver wire who can be your starting quarterback or you can play matchup with, because I would not trust Carson Wentz to be my week-to-week guy. I would still look for a guy to kind of rotate in there. If I could get somebody better, I would swap him out.
I am overreacting. Since the year that he had his MVP season, ever since the Eagles took off towards the Super Bowl, Carson Wentz has not looked like the same guy who we were talking about as maybe the best quarterback in the league, an MVP. He's been solid. Last year, he finished as the quarterback 12. But to that point, this last year, week 2, 43 attempts, 25 completions, 230 yards, 2 interceptions, and a touchdown. This year, week 1, 42 attempts, 24 completions, 270 yards, 2 interceptions, and 2 touchdowns. This isn't like out of the norm for a Carson Wentz week. He's going to have those really nice weeks where he goes near 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, and you're happy you started Carson Wentz. But I think he's a QB2 in a Superflex 2 QB league. I think he's a streamer in single QB leagues. I want to believe in Carson Wentz, but the weapons are not there. They had injuries to their offensive line before this season even began, which had us questioning Miles Sanders. But I question Carson Wentz here because he doesn't have anybody out there to help him out. He went to Dallas Goedert. Zach Ertz had 3 receptions this week. Rager broke off a big one, but the Eagles are just short on weapons, and it's all falling back on Carson Wentz's head. I don't want to ride that ride this season.
I wouldn't even blame it on the weapons. I'd put it on the offensive line being banged up, and honestly, I'd put some of that blame on Doug Peterson. This team hasn't been the same. The quarterback position hasn't been the same since Frank Reich left. He doesn't look like the guy that everybody's expecting him to be, and I put a lot of that blame for Carson Wentz on Doug Peterson. It just looks disjointed and clunky all the time. And I know they went out and they got a lot of speedy guys to try to stretch the field, but even that looks clunky. It doesn't look like they're totally in sync.
The offensive line looked bad. He looks very average. And average, we said it can be a streamable play, it can be a QB2 play. But average is also what we saw from Phillip Rivers, and I'm a little surprised we haven't talked about him as a top disappointment.
I'll echo nice sentiments. That offense just looked clunky and disjointed. All right, moving on. We got the GOAT, Tom Brady.
I'm going to drop into the middle on this one. I'm probably underreacting a little bit more. He had 3 turnovers. He also had a fumble that came in. So I don't expect 3 turnovers from Tom Brady. This 20 years of being in the league, I think this is kind of an aberration game. Obviously, it's the new team, the new unit, the new teammates. Mike Evans was injured. I don't think that those are any excuse. I think that a healthy Mike Evans, Tom Brady might have still probably come out a little bit shaky in his debut. But as this team kind of starts to get into gear a little bit more, I don't know if they reach the ceiling that I was projecting them for over the offseason. Because I really have this team absolutely grinding out some fantasy production.
I'm going to go right down the middle as well. Yeah, they get Carolina next week, and we already talked about what Vegas did to Carolina. It's a perfect opportunity to get right. But you know what? It'll depend on Mike. It won't solely depend on Mike Evans, but Mike Evans needs to get healthy. He didn't look good out there on Sunday. They probably would have been better served holding him out for that game, just like Detroit did Kenny Galladay. Especially with these hamstrings. You see a lot of teams with these hamstring injuries. But no, I think Brady's going to be fine. He gets Carolina next week. I think he'll bounce back. I think this offense will bounce back. I still don't think it's going to be it's going to have as high of an output as they had last year with Jameis Winston at the helm. I still think it's a solid fantasy offense. I just don't see the volume in order to reach the heights they reached last year.
We're not about to say that Tom Brady is just the greatest system quarterback of all time, and now he's in a different system.
Cam looked pretty good.
Yeah.
Preach.
Yeah,
we want all that smoke, Kosher. We want all that smoke.
No, Brady's going to be fine. I think this was what we saw with a lot of teams in week 1, just trying to get used to new teammates. I know that Evans, you hit the nail on the head. Evans is hurt. You take Evans or Godwin out of the passing scheme, it's going to make it easier to key in on the other one. Beyond that, I think it's just going to take a little time for Brady to gel with the new team, learn the new offense.